Hi, my name is Jesse Anderson. In this video, I'm going to talk about who should be creating initial data products. Should they be application engineers or should they be data engineers? To help me do this, I'm going to whiteboard this out so that you can see the various trade-offs and understand the scenario of which I'm talking about. So when we come over here, we often have a disconnect or a wall where we have our web application over here on the left, and we have our data infrastructure, data products over here on the right. Now the issue happens when we have a product. Usually it's a web application. That's a very common thing that's going to output data. So that output of data comes from our application, and then it will traverse this wall because we need that data in our, perhaps it's a data warehouse, perhaps it's a data lake, that we need that data in some fashion. And what happens here is that the data that's coming out from the web application is in JSON format. And often here we have the issue of the web application people, they know data in a database. They know data in JSON format, XML. But any deeper than that, they don't really understand it and they don't really know about it. So when we need it into a binary format, we need it in Avro, we need it in protobuf, whatever. Oftentimes these web application people don't really know it. So we have this issue of who should be creating this, because we have this whole firewall, this wall in between here. And this wall in between here can be a problem because who is supposed to create this part that traverses the other side? Now, one of the key problems here, key drivers here, is that the web application team, they believe and oftentimes do work very fast. They'll work in these very tight iterations. For example, if they're doing Scrum or something like that, or perhaps even Kanban, they're doing iterations much faster. So this data that's coming out of this application, they're wanting that to change all the time. And in fact, that can change sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. But suffice it to say, this data is changing all the time because they think that that's how you do that, that's the speed at which you change data. And that really comes from their lack of understanding of how this data is used. So for them, the data is used as a way of looking at something, as a way of looking at perhaps debugging, perhaps just a cursory look, but they're not understanding the data side of, we need this data to be consistent. We're going to be looking at this data years later. And so there's this disconnect between the two sort of teams and what they're after and what they understand. So here, JSON, good, bad, or indifferent. I personally don't think that that's the right format for data, but suffice it to say. So what we have here is who handles this. So one possibility here is that the data side does that. So what we've done before is we basically have this kind of firewall in between. So this firewall is there to translate, and that translates and ETLs and sanity checks all of this data, because oftentimes this web application team, here's what we got, this is what we're putting out. Here's what we got, this is what we're putting out. There's absolutely no sanity check. There may be bugs. And so what we have to do on the data side is kind of put up our own firewall, our transformation layer, that will then transform this into however we're going to store that. Maybe that's in a database, perhaps that's in a file, S3, something like that. Now the issue here is now we have this part is basically sane. We have this in a binary format. Maybe we have this in Avro or what have you. So the day is saved once we get past here, but it doesn't solve this upstream problem that's right here of this web application team is changing all the time. And that becomes a problem because the data engineers that are maintaining this transformation layer are always having to find it. And the worst part is sometimes this will get changed without a notification to the person or team maintaining this. That's the general problem that we hit here. And we also have this problem of if we the web application team not really buying into, we need our data to maintain some sort of sanity. So we put our data engineers on this, and our application team is kind of segregated out. Not the greatest way. So what we may want to do, and this is a way that Zhamak Dehghani talks about in Data Mesh. This is a way that I've talked about in some of my writing as well. And that's to move the responsibility this way. So what we will do in this case is this application team would be the producers of the data. So here, when we have our application, our new version of our application, what that application would do is that will directly put into our, maybe we're putting that in real time. So that would directly publish into, let's say, Kafka. So here we have our Kafka, and then that gets laid down in various places. Now, what you may be thinking there is, oh no, I don't want my web application team to have direct access to be able to publish. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to teach them about best practices. We're going to have them use an Avro schema. So Avro schema over here. And why would we use this? Just as an explanation, perhaps for those who don't understand what Avro is, or perhaps you're a web application engineer not understanding this. This Avro schema gives us a schema that we're going to adhere to. Now, a common question here is, well, doesn't JSON have a schema? It somewhat does, but there's no data type definition, unfortunately. So this data type definition that happens here, let's say your web application code is written in Node or JavaScript or some other language, and then we come over here to the data infrastructure side, and now we're in a JVM language. That can be a problem because we need to have this data type definition be cross-language. And over here. So what we do by using Avro is we have our data type definition be cross-language. So with Avro, we can have that. We can write our code over here in JavaScript, for example, and our code over here in a JVM language, Java, Scala, something like that. But another important thing that we have here is the ability to do what's called Schema Evolution. Now, Schema Evolution is important because we're going to change things over here on the application side. Now we can change them without having to rewrite everything that's over here. So let's imagine we have our data stored over here into an S3. We can't go through and every time that there's a change over here, rewrite all of our data over here in the S3 side. That just doesn't work. But what we can do is by using Avro's Schema Evolution, we can make schema changes that will be compatible, and we don't have to go rewrite things here. We just have a version 1, and we have a version 2, and we have a version 3. Now, one thing I will say here is we don't want to go crazy with our schema evolution. Having 100 different ones probably going to be an issue. So this is a time when the web application team that was over here trying to just move as fast as possible. Well, guess what? When they moved as fast as possible, nobody remembers those 100 different versions and all the changes that they made. That can be a whole problem. I know I've dealt with clients where the web application team had 50 different versions. Nobody remembers all the changes. And so over here on this side, on the data side, there was all these transforms and such, but they could never keep up. So that can be a huge problem. So what we need to do is we need to work with our web application team over here to help them understand some of the basics, some of the reasons why we can't make just changes all the time. It's bad engineering, and they just may not know that because they've never been told that. They've never had to actually do this. What you may want to do is help explain it to them with your database changes, let's say. Just imagine if you change the database every single time or on a daily basis, something like that, that's a problem. So they may understand it in those terms. And then you can expand that out and say, okay, if we modify the database every day, now and imagine it didn't get updated, it didn't change, there's always this version around, it will help them understand this. So this is a key part. So how do we do this knowledge transfer between these two teams? We have our data team over here. We have our web application team over here. And this is one of the things that I talk about in my writing as well, on data teams and data engineering teams, and then talking and working with other teams within the organization, is that we need to go through and we need to help these web application engineers understand. And this may actually require some coding. It may actually require somebody from the data team coming over here to our web application team and actually teaching them, here is Avro, here is, and actually having them write the code, because they may not be capable, or they may not have the time or the inclination. There's a lot of reasons that happens, a lot of reasons for people to say no. But if we fix this part, so if we remember how we talked about this transformation over here and how big of a problem that can be, how time consuming, if we remove this and we fix it over here, we'll actually save time overall this way. So what we can do is we will bring either somebody in on a consultative basis, perhaps consistently, there's a lot of possibilities there, to educate this web application team, teach them what this does, why you don't change schema all the time, perhaps even writing the code for them so that they can make their own changes. Now, one key thing that you're going to have to do here is perhaps help them on the schema evolution side. Once again, that would be a change that you may want to do. So this is when most data, a lot of data, is a cross-organizational issue, where if the web application team wants to make a schema change, that you need to have a process in place, hopefully not a heavyweight process, hopefully a lightweight process, that coordinates between these two teams and says, we're about to make a schema change. And what your data team may do is they may look over that schema change and say, yes, this is compatible, you're not breaking anything, yes, go ahead and do that. Or perhaps that they're not thinking through things, they're not thinking through the problem well. There would be some help from this data type, the data side. Very key that this happens, this communication happens. Otherwise, the times you'll find out that they've changed it over here is when something down here breaks. So this process is really key. This is where management needs to come in. The managers of these two teams really need to work together at that management level so that the individual contributors on these teams see that and work together at the application level. So when we have a schema change, what we would do is we would have that process. And sometimes one of the negotiation points there is this an informed decision or is this a consent decision? What this means is, does the web application team just inform and say, we're going to make this change? Or do they need the data team's consent there? And that's a big question of, do we need to say, yes, you can do this? Do they need to do that? What do they need to do? And so if the team is consistently not really owning up to their side, not really understanding this, I would suggest doing a consent. Hold their feet to the fire, make them actually go through this, make them actually think through these changes well, because they just may not have ever done it. And they may have an excuse. They may have lots of excuses. You're making us slow, you're making us this, whatever. This consent, and once you get that relationship much better, that could be an inform. Because another benefit or another way that you may do this is if this team is constantly breaking things or constantly not doing schema evolutionary changes well, they're going to break this downstream, which in turn breaks, let's say, a dashboard or something business facing. So our stats over here get broken, and this is a good time when we say, hey, let's say it's the CMO, let's say it's the CEO. Hey, CEO, the problem with this breaking is actually over here. We can't get this team to adhere to this. So some pressure from the business side might be required in some of these cases to say, yes, we need to have that team really be told that they need to do this. So overall, when we think about sort of who should create these data products, shifting left is a great way to do that. However, as it's hopefully very clear now, this shift left isn't just a technical thing where we say, hey, everybody, just go learn Avro. It's actually a organizational thing where we need to put process in place. We need to have help. We need to actually do some things organizationally and process-wise, not just technically. And this is where teams who try to do this without addressing the organizational and process side, the people side of things, they'll fail at this. And they'll say, oh, we tried that, didn't work. They didn't fix the process side. They needed to address the technical, organizational, and process sides all three at once. And if you do all three of these things, then you can make this shift left, make better data products that aren't changing all the time, make them so that they can be used by the rest of the organization. If you'd like to know more about how data teams should work with the rest of the organization, I recommend you reading my latest book, Data Teams. You can go to datateams.io to read that. Have a great day.